Hey everyone, I know I haven't been on here in a long time and I apologize for that. The end of the year last year was kind of crazy, a lot of stuff going on. I don't know if I've made a video since everything happened last year, but my dad passed away the end of last year from cancer, and things had just gotten a little hectic, and so I just didn't have time or didn't feel like recording. And I know this is not the best setup here, but I have a new vehicle now, and my the magnetic mount that I use for my phone is in a different spot, and so it just is what it is. But I've been listening to a book by Joel Salatin, which I'm sure anybody who is paying attention to my videos knows who Joel Salatin is. If not, look him up. He's worth listening to. He owns the Polyface Farm in Virginia, a multi-generational farm. They produce all sorts of things. It's a great operation. But I've been listening to one of his to an audiobook version of one of his books and watching some of his videos. Give me 1 second here. Need my sunglasses. And I just started thinking about things. I don't keep animals, as I've talked about before. That may change at some point, but right now I don't keep animals. But I do keep bees, and I just started thinking about some of the things he's talked about, some of the ways he does things. I've listened to him talk about people. You can visit his farm, and he's talked about the people in the area where he is in Virginia. There's a lot of people who really don't like him because of the way he runs his farm. And it just struck me as it's just so weird to me that because you're not running something exactly the way the quote-unquote experts tell you to do it, it causes vitriol, and I don't understand. I just don't get it. And it made me think about a lecture that I listened to one time about beekeeping, and here in Florida, and of course the person that was speaking, well, they have a successful apiary. Now this person's apiary is up in the Panhandle, so it's quite a ways away from me, but they were talking about, the lecture was basically like a beginner's guide to getting into beekeeping. And so they were just giving the basics, and several of the things that they said is the industry standard, but I question whether it should be. And I'm still a novice beekeeper, but I've learned a lot of things, and in my area there's a large group of beekeepers that meet, I think once a month or something like that, and they have lectures and they have just this, that, and the other, and I've never gone to one, and for right now I don't intend on going to any. And the problem, or the reason why I don't want to go, is because of what this speaker was talking about. There's an industry standard to beekeeping, especially if it's like a professional outfit. So you have to get certain type of hive boxes, I should say, which I do. I keep the vertical hive boxes. I don't remember what the name of, is it Langstroth, I think. It's the last name of the guy who invented this style of hive box. But there are other ways there are other types of boxes you can keep it in, like the Layens horizontal hive plus and minuses to both of those. Really not one way that's right or not as far as that goes. But that's what, if you're going to be a commercial beekeeper, you got to use the Langstroth hives, vertical hives, and that's what you have to start with. That's not necessarily my problem. My problem begins, he starts talking about how you keep the bees and, what they feed on and all that sort of stuff. And there's generally 2 times of the year where they have what's called a nectar flow, which is where trees or wildflowers or whatever, shrubs, whatever, are blooming, and so the bees have a lot of forage. They have a lot of places to go and collect nectar and pollen. And so during the nectar flow times of the year, the hive is extremely busy, and it's where it's going to do a lot of its growth because they're bringing in resources very readily. We're going into one of the nectar flows right now. It's usually, at least in my area, spring and fall. In my area, we've got a lot of the wildflowers are starting to bloom. There's certain trees that start to bloom. The one nice thing about Florida, especially in Central Florida, is generally year-round the bees have something to pollinate. And there are times where it slows down, but there's usually never a time where it completely goes away. And there are some places, obviously places more up north where it snows and stuff like that, where they can't get any resources until things warm back up and the plants come back to life and that sort of thing. So in between the nectar flow times of the year, you have what's called a dearth, and that's when the availability of resources slows down or stops, and it can happen to varying degrees. So like in the summer in Florida, in Central Florida, a lot of the wildflowers stop blooming because it's usually in spring, and the flowers, the resources slow down some, but there are other things that bloom that they can forage off of, and then just flowers and plants that people plant themselves. And in winter is another dearth, especially depending on how cold it gets. So during the dearth periods of the year, and the industry standard for commercial beekeeping says you have to feed the bees sugar water in order to keep them alive. And that is a point of contention for me. I challenge that. Sugar water is not good for bees. Nectar and sugar water are not the same thing. And yes, nectar has sugar in it. If you've ever tasted nectar out of a honeysuckle or something, it tastes sweet because there's sugar in it. Nectar contains a lot of sugar. But there's a difference between the sugar in nectar that's produced by a flower, produced by a plant, than the highly processed white table sugar that you buy at the grocery store. And that's what they say you've got to make sugar water out of. You mix a certain level of sugar into water. They have these special jars, and they go on attachments that you put on the hive box. You put these jars in those attachments, it opens them up to a point where the bees can come out and get the sugar water. First and foremost, that is not healthy for the bees. There are an array of micronutrients in nectar that are they're simply not present in sugar water. So the bees are not getting the health benefits from the sugar water that they would from the nectar. Another big thing is a lot of bee larvae are eating pollen. They're being fed the pollen. The nectar, majority of it, if not all of it, and this is where I'm still a novice, is stored away to produce honey. And so the pollen is what's getting fed to the larva to produce healthy adults. So sugar water doesn't give any pollen. So, what exactly is it doing is my question. What exactly is giving bees sugar water doing as opposed to them going to flowers and getting nectar and pollen? I would say that it's doing nothing. Really, in reality, it's probably harming the bees. So that's one thing that they insist, you must do this in order to keep bees. Another thing that they say is you must treat for varroa mites. It's a type of mite that the bees get, and a lot of people are saying that it's what's causing the hive collapses. And again, this is a point of contention with me. I challenge that. And the reason I challenge that is because bees live in the wild. Bees, and I just did or attempted a removal last year. Someone had a beehive move into a hollowed out portion of a tree in their backyard. And when I got there to remove it, they already had honey stored up. It was a very healthy hive. Nobody was taking care of that hive. Nobody was giving them sugar water. Nobody was treating them for varroa mites. But yet they were thriving. I would say that the giving bees treatment for varroa mites, upsetting the apple cart, as it were, in the beehive constantly, and treating for varroa mites, constantly checking for them and treating for them and checking for them and treating for them, is actually harming the bees. And I know people would say, well, varroa mites are killing hives. Yes, in some cases that's happening. Varroa mites are one of the things that can take over a hive and kill the hive. There are other things that can kill a hive or drive a hive away or something like that, but varroa mites are not good. They're bad news. But if all the beehives in the wild were collapsing and just were non-existent anymore because of varroa mites, I would believe that. But you have healthy, thriving hives in the wild all the time, and no one's checking them, no one's treating them, no one's feeding them sugar water. None of that stuff is happening. So I question whether or not this is actually helpful. I think that you're actually harming the bees the more that you are constantly going into their hives, constantly giving them pharmaceuticals. You're damaging their immune systems. You're not letting them work the natural way of things, or as Joel Salatin would say, you're not letting the bees be bees. Another layer to that is, if I have a hive that's constantly getting sick, then I don't want that hive. That hive is weak. There's something wrong with it. And there could be a number of things. I would rather that hive just go ahead and die out, and I'll replace it with a stronger, healthier hive. And so I don't understand this, and I think some of it derives from people who are trying to make money, and so they don't want any of their hives to collapse or to fly away or whatever, which that's called absconding. They don't want any of that to happen because they're going to lose money. Okay, well, yeah, you could, but I would rather lose a hive or two if they are a sickly hive or an old hive that's been around for a long time that can't, take care of itself anymore. Instead of me putting all this time, effort, and money into keeping this hive limping along, let it die out like it would in the wild, and then replace it with another swarm of healthy bees. So if you've got a hive, and I know there's a lot of, farmers that would say the same thing about their chickens or that sort of thing. If you've got a hive that's constantly getting sick and you're having to constantly give it pharmaceuticals, then something's wrong. And we're not talking about people here. You need to let nature take its course and let that hive die out, and then replace it with a hive that is healthier. But I listened to this guy, and he even went as far as to say, if you're not treating for varroa mites, you are causing the problem, because your bees are passing these varroa mites on to other people's healthy bees, and you're infecting everyone around you. Where have we heard that kind of line before? And when he said that, it made me mad, and I wanted to stand up and argue with him on it. But it just doesn't make sense to constantly mess with the bees, to constantly give them treatments that they would not be getting in the wild. Like I said, if we went out and there were no bees, you never ever found another hive of bees in the wild ever again, then I would maybe understand where they're coming from. But the fact that you can walk out and find a hollow tree, and when it's swarm season, which is usually spring to early summer, it's not uncommon to see a beehive that has moved into a hollow tree. When that's still going on, and there are some very large, very healthy hives that are living out in the wild on their own, no one is giving them sugar water, no one is treating them for varroa mites, no one is treating them for hive beetles, no one is, making sure that they have, insulation around their homes when it's cold outside. No one is doing any of that stuff. They're out there living by themselves, taking care of themselves, doing what God designed them to do. Because that's still a thing, and a lot of times those hives are healthier than hives that you would buy online and bring in to have your own beehive. That's a totally different story. But a lot of times those hives are healthier. They're a little more aggressive, but more aggressive bees means healthier bees a lot of times. So, those hives are healthier. What's that tell you? No one's taking care of them. No one's treating them. No one's feeding them. They're taking care of themselves. They're fighting off predators. They're staying alive, even though they may have, because there is not a hive out there that's not going to have varroa mites in it now. But they can mitigate it themselves. If they can't mitigate it themselves, that hive is too weak and it needs to die out. So it's just something that I thought of. Like I said, I don't keep animals. The only thing I keep now, I keep worms, but worms are completely different. But keeping bees is kind of the same thing. Stuff that Joel Salatin talked about with, the way he raises chickens and the way he raises cattle and the way he raises rabbits. It's people can't stand it because he's not doing it according to the standard procedures. And I know I've talked about on this channel before with gardening, don't worry about these standard procedures. Find what works for you and do it. And I don't understand, and this is what made me think this way, I just don't understand the hatred that people get who say, I have an issue with the standard procedure. I think that there's some errors in there, and I think that actually doing it like this is better. It's worked better for me. It's something that was on my mind, and I know I haven't made a video in a long time, hopefully soon I'll get back into being able to show what's going on. Things are starting to wake back up. We had a pretty harsh winter here this year, and we had several freezes. We had a couple nights down into the upper 20s. We haven't had that in several years, so yeah, hopefully, everything will start to pick back up. A lot of the trees are waking up. I'm trying some new stuff. I'm always trying new stuff because I'm experimenting to see what ends up working best for me, and whatever works the best for me is what I'll stick with. And I encourage everyone that's watching or has watched, that's what you should do as well. But yeah, that's about it. I thought that interesting, and the fact that it even applied to beekeeping, and that, if you don't do the way that the experts, quote unquote experts, say that you should do it, then, it can go as far as people get the USDA called on them and stuff like that. And it's just ridiculous. So, yeah, anyways, I just felt like talking about that, and hopefully I'll be able to get back to this more, and please leave me your thoughts, let me know what you think, and I'll talk with you next time.